And can I say what an absolute pleasure it is for this to be my first Scrabble Fest and to meet you lovely lots. It really is great fun. So I'm going to be talking about before 1984, and unfortunately, it's the most boring period because there's not much that I can show you. Had it been after 1984, there's all sorts of archival things I could show you. But bear with me, there are a few little treats along the way, but it's perhaps not as exciting as it might be. Bear with me. So this afternoon, I'm going to talk for about 25 minutes, half an hour, about before 1984, in other words, before the BBC broadcast our serial. So let me take you back just before 5 o'clock on the 21st of November 1984. John Craven's news round had just finished. There was an advert for Blue Peter, and, well, rather than me describe it, let's watch it. There should be sound. I'll go back. Let's go back. How are we doing for sound, Carl? Let's have a show of hands whilst Carl is sorting this out. How many people were there and remembered the first broadcast? Lovely. Who came to it after the first broadcast, a few years later? And who has never watched it in their lives and has been dragged along, kicking and screaming to this weird group of people? No, no one. No, you're too embarrassed, aren't you? Yes. You can provide her music, but yeah. I do have my laptop as backup, but I suspect you won't be able to hear very much of it. Actually, it will get out of sync, so. It's always the sound, isn't it? It's always the sound issues. Whilst we're doing show of hands then, who has read, this is a stupid question because I hope you're all going to put your hands up, who's read the book? Ooh, still a few, haven't you? Still okay. Who knows the edition they've read? Who has read the abridged edition with K on the front and, yeah. And who's read the full, magnificent, full, unexpurgated, uncut version? Marvellous, thank you. Better not be available for free. Archive.org has got the original text. Although Masefiled is still in copyright, so anybody who suggests that you download that from Archive is defrauding the Masefiled estate out of royalties. It being one of the few in royalties that the Masefiled estate actually does get. The point is that Masefiled was actually a very well-known and international bestseller and commanded huge royalties. And nowadays it is completely and utterly dried up with the exception of occasional bits for the Box of Delights. I'm still waiting for a thumbs up from our sound, but otherwise you've got 25 minutes of me rabbiting on like this. Yeah, in talking about the book, one thing I will say is that I had the pleasure of being a fellow at the University of Texas, and I went along, and I think I had about 3 weeks at the University of Texas, and I left the best till last. I had various research tasks to do, but I knew that my last day, which I would try and keep free, would be the day that I would have the manuscript under my hand. was looking forward to it for that, and I thought, oh, shall I just sit this afternoon? No, I will. And honestly, when that was delivered and plonked on my desk, and just to see the way that Masefiled had crafted that text, had gone in, had written first drafts, had revised it, had gone back, scrubbed bits out. The thing about his style when he was writing a manuscript is that he would revise and go back and rework, and little bits, and we're obviously in the days before word processors, but there are little bits where paper would be stuck on top of other bits of text, and occasionally some of those fell off, and you could look underneath and see little bits of text. So it's a real sort of working document. And yeah, Masefiled, before word processors, just got his scissors, cut things out, stuck them on top. And it's a real sort of working document. And then at the back of this, I mean, it sort of gets out of sequence towards the end. At the back are all those episodes. I included one in the book, Opening the Box of Delights, but there are others. There are other little sequences which were cut out of the original and never made it back in. And it's absolutely fascinating. And the point is, I think, and I'll say this until I'm blue in the face, that Masefiled writes prose with the precision of a poet. The words are beautifully crafted, and he knows exactly the right phrase to use, exactly the right word. And this is why, actually, a great thing to have the Box of Delights come out as a paperback for the serial, but it was an abridged text. And Masefiled absolutely goes on these flights of fantasy, which are just him sort of riffing on this idea of fantasy. It's an amazing thing to look back at how this actually gets developed. I've got the thumbs up. No more rabbiting on. Thank you, Carl. So, we're back to 5 o'clock. We've finished John Craven's news round. There's an advert about to happen, advertising Blue Peter. Let's watch it.
Discover the unique way the experts at Slimbridge record their arrival on Blue Peter tomorrow at 5 o'clock.
On BBC One now, prepare to be thrilled and chilled as we begin a 6-part dramatisation of John Masefield's magical mystery adventure tale, The Box of Delights.
It's 1984. That is it. What's the story before we got to this part? Well, we could start with the book, we could start with the manuscript. Let me start with the book. It was published in the UK on the 30th of August, 1935. There were 7,500 copies, and they sold for 7 shillings. That's what it looks like, the UK edition. 7,500 copies sold for 7 shillings and 6pence. In the US, it was published on the 6th of November, and the price was $2.50. The strange thing is the print run. Masefield's previous novel, The Taking of the Grye, hands up who's ever read it. Very well done, sir. 10,000 copies. After The Box of Delights, we had Victoria's Troy, 15,000 copies. Why then, in the middle, before Victoria's Troy, after The Taking of the Grye, did we get The Box of Delights, 7,500 copies? I cannot explain it, and believe you me, I've been through the publisher's archives. The point is, it is a rare book. Wearing professional hats, now I work for one of the premium antiquarian book dealers in the world, and we sold a copy in dust jacket only in the last few weeks for a very nice copy in quite a nice dust jacket, but the value, we sold a copy at £2,500. That's how rare it is, and also how incredibly collectible it is, but that's another story. Masefield's previous novel for children, The Box of Delights, 15,000 copies. Again, 7,500. I cannot work it out. There was also a limited signed issue of The Midnight Folk, and indeed Victoria's Troy and The Taking of the Grey. No such limited signed edition for The Box of Delights. It's as if the publishers had it down on it, but it's not quite the case. On publication, it received the attention one would expect when the Poet Laureate published a novel. The Times found the tale all wildly impossible and easily credible. The Sunday Times decided that children would love it and will carry some grown-ups clean out of their adult skins. The Daily Mirror called the book an original and delightful fantasy. And the Liverpool Daily Post, I like this one, stated that if anyone writes a better Christmas book than Mr. Masefield's, it will be a miracle. What's particularly interesting is the opinion of Masefield's first publisher. C.S. Evans read it one weekend and then wrote back to Masefield saying, "It is a delightful story, and I could not help thinking all the way through what a wonderful play could be based upon it. A play which might have the popularity and permanence of Peter Pan. The mixture of fantasy, poetry, and adventure is extremely successful." But it was 1935. 4 years later, of course, Britain was at war with Germany. The book was largely forgotten until 1942. In other words, the first 6 years of publication were very, very quiet and did not suggest to anyone that Masefield had written a masterpiece. In 1942, we had the first radio adaptation. Had it not been for the BBC and Children's Hour, I suspect The Box of Delights would have disappeared without trace. Masefield wrote many novels and plays, but who here, let's have a show of hands, has read The Hawbucks? Odd Tar. Thank you, Mum. The Taking of the Grey. Who has seen the plays, and it's within living memory, so the Orange Tree Theatre did it a few years ago, who has seen The Tragedy of Nan? All these Masefield works, hugely popular. So, had it not been for the BBC in 1942, it was then that a 17-year-old gentleman called Robert Holland suggested the task of adapting it for radio. And one senses that the BBC were overly courteous towards Masefield. There was a sense of panic. Masefield was contacted, and the BBC sent him a section of the first bit of script. The BBC wrote to Masefield and said, "We are quite prepared for you to say that you hate the very idea, and equally that you think the adaptation very poor. On the other hand, we should very much like to try to give our children this delightful story." Masefield wrote back to say that he thought Robert Holland had made a prosperous opening. There are internal notes in the BBC's written archive centre, and you can get a sense of caution. One assistant on Children's Hour was really, really worried. There's an internal memo at the BBC in 1942 that says, "This is one of the biggest problems I think we've ever had to face. We are proposing to hand our listeners, without any warning other than can be given by music, a world of pure and utter magic, where anything can and does happen, where no one and nothing are what they seem, and where only the factual strands are that there is some sort of conflict going on between some people and others." That's a remarkable level of panic. And Robert Holland responded, the person who adapted it, saying that surely it is the adult mind that finds it hardest to accept fantasy. Robert Holland continued in his task and so strongly embraced the fantasy element that he abandoned the dream ending. Masefield was sent a script and he responded, "This is uncharacteristic." Masefield was furious. "I have now read through the script submitted to me.
It seems to me that the writer has missed the essential point in my design. The book is a record of a dream, displaying a little boy's mind on his coming home for the Christmas holidays. To omit even the glimmer of a suggestion that it is a dream, and to make of it nothing but a fantastic gangster story, while suggesting that it is still my design, is, well, I ask you, what? He's not happy. A swift rewrite was therefore required, but Robert Holland, who'd done the script, had joined the RAF and was now overseas. Enter John Keir-Cross. We'll come back to him. But Keir-Cross was one of the producers of Children's Hour and would later write science fiction and also fantasy novels. In the late 1960s, he became a writer for The Archers. He found that with subtle music and acoustic effects, he could create a workable script, and having got approval from Masefiled, the broadcast was scheduled to be on air in 6 episodes between the 12th of November and the 17th of December. Think about our serial, how that's timed beautifully to finish on Christmas Eve. This is very much earlier in November and finishing quite early in December. The cast included Norman Shelley, who was Winnie the Pooh long before Alan Bennett, and also, surprisingly, Charles Hawtrey. 15 years before the first Carry On film. They were in the original cast on the radio. And by all accounts, the BBC created magic. The story was one of general good over evil, and it was broadcast, obviously, during the blackout to huge quantities of evacuated children. The fantasy writer Alan Garner has said, "The initial and strongest impact of the Box of Delights was the 1943 radio adaptation on Children's Hour. For me, and for all of my contemporaries I've discussed the experience with, it's the radio production, not the book, that seared us. The book wasn't available." I love that word, seared us. Perfect word. Alan Garner, huge fan of the Box of Delights. Take a look at the personal ads from the Sunday Times from the 18th of January 1970. If you can see it, I may expand it in the middle. It says, BBC Children's Hour. Was it an unforgettable experience? Well, really, that's the first person trying to join the Box of Delights appreciation group on Facebook, 35 years before Facebook was there. Desperate to find other people for whom it was an unforgettable experience. I'd love to know who Box AJ144 was. If it's any of you, no, okay. So after that initial radio adaptation, it became a regular seasonal favourite at the BBC. It appears that more or less the same script from 1943 was used again in 1948 and 1955. John Keir-Cross noted that in the box, a great deal was made up literally on the spot. Whole alternative treatments for scenes were whacked out in the studio where we saw how clear or otherwise a particular sequence might be. This was a popular seasonal favourite from the BBC. Remember, the book was now out of print. Looking at copies of the Radio Times, we can see some consistent casting was now in place. Norman Shelley was back. He was the narrator, and Charles Hawtrey was Mouse. Unfortunately, of course, none of these adaptations survive in the BBC archive, and no off-air recordings have surfaced. Not much of a presentation, is it? It's now in the late 1950s. The novel was reprinted for the first time. The people know the Box of Delights, as I've said, is because of the BBC, not because of the book. Whatever you say about the BBC, and some people in high authority say more than others, but it is a very valuable resource for keeping this book in public consciousness. But it wasn't only the BBC. Independent television now enters, 2 decades before our serial. ITV, broadcasting for schools. They did an episode of their series Storybook, which was devoted to the Box of Delights, On the 7th of November 1962, an 18-minute, that's all, 18 minutes, gave dramatised extracts from the book. This, again, I suspect, would have sunk without all trace, except that the broadcaster was keen to assess how effective their broadcast had been, and they sent feedback report cards to several schools. Photocopies of those report cards were sent to John Masefiled, and therefore they ended up in his archive at the Humanities Research Centre at the University of Texas. They're actually quite entertaining and a marvellous insight into the task of filling in forms and also perhaps the comprehension of teaching staff. An overall rating for the programme was required. You can see up there at the top box. From 29 forms, 13 schools gave the highest praise, very good, and 15 schools opted for good. Only one school failed to complete the box at all. Content was then assessed. The majority scored the programme about right. Three schools decided it was in parts too advanced, and 2 schools failed to complete the section. It's the final sections of the form here which are of most interest. The question, what were the children's general reactions, prompted some fine answers. Interested, showed enthusiasm, disappointed it wasn't a serial, absolutely entranced and attention was held throughout, enthralled, disappointed when it finished, carried away by the mystery of the presentation, absolutely enthralled, groans when the programme finished, amused with the idea of Rat talking. They're going to drop big hints at home before Christmas. And this is my favourite, simply smashing. Asked for the teacher's general comments, responses include book much in demand in school library, the magic of the story was really felt by the class, and children love fantasy. It was a pity that not more of the story could be televised. Ultimately, of course, the programme was recorded because it was broadcast again 2 days later, but it doesn't survive. If we're looking for surviving media, we need to travel forward in time a further 4 years, and we're back to BBC Radio. In 1966, John Keir-Cross had set to work on a new script. This provided a version freely dramatised for radio. He stated in the Radio Times that some 20 years ago, I wrote a serial version of it, and still, to this day, I am asked when it might be repeated. Recently, writing a script for The Archers, I made a passing reference to this unusual tale, and from all over the world came letters from its secret addicts. Remember that advert, the column in Sunday Times. There are secret addicts. There are public addicts, of course, but there are secret ones. The 1966 version is a single Saturday night theatre broadcast lasting 90 minutes. There were 2 veterans in the cast who'd been in all previous broadcasts. Wilfred Babbage as Chubby Man, and Norman Shelley, who changed role for a narrator to become Rat. This version was first broadcast on the 24th of December 1966. There again, that's the first time that we get the Box of Delights going out on Christmas Eve. It's also a significant date as far as the year is concerned. 1966 was, although nobody knew it at the time, Masefield's last Christmas. It is feasible he could have heard this adaptation on the radio. The production was recorded and repeated in 1968 and 1969, and then the BBC decided to wipe it. Off it goes with all your Doctor Who's and Steptoes and Sons and Hancock's Half Hours. But it exists in private collections, and I'm delighted to share a section with you now. Previous versions had used a section of Healy Hutchinson's Carol Symphony, which we all know and love, and here we'll hear the twiddly music introduced. It's almost at the end of the broadcast. Abner Brown has been defeated. He's fallen into the sluice. Kay and the victors must get to Tatchester in time for the 1000th Christmas ceremony.
The end, in sad indignity after all, of great Abner, my ancient enemy. For all his sins, requiescat. And now we were on the placid lake, and coming down to the shore to meet us was the Lady of the Ring herself, in a great sleigh drawn by lions and unicorns. In another moment we were all aboard with her, and surging through the night towards the cathedral, every single one of us, down to the very smallest choir boy of all. And how shall I ever describe that magical journey of that unforgettable Christmas Eve? We soared into the very heavens, the little unicorn hooves striking sparkles out of the air. The shining snowy country spread out far below us, starred by the lights of the villages, and the river gleamed where it caught the moonlight. And as we went, we all fell silent. And now we were down from the heavens, and skimming over the feathery snow itself, piled high in the narrow lanes after the great storm. All the church bells of all the parishes were ringing. The tremblings of their music went thronging by in the swift air. We saw the great pinnacled tower of the cathedral, all floodlit for this splendid 1000th night. And in the square, a mighty multitude was gathered. Among them, the red and white ranks of the famous Thatcher Regiment, the Thatcher Toms, all ready to fire a salute of cannon as a signal for the stroke of midnight itself.
I love the fact how I got hold of that recording. I met up with someone about 25 years ago who was a Masefiled collector. It was quite nice to meet someone else in the world like that. And he had been in advertising, and on one of the occasions he specifically booked a voiceover artist because he had been in the 1966 Box of Delights, and they'd got chatting, and he had said that he had a recording of it, which he then passed to this Masefiled collector, and I then got a copy of that. So it's now on, I think someone has put it on YouTube. It does exist, but I think it's really effective to hear that Healy Hutchinson Carol Symphony coming back in at one of those memorable moments in the narrative. We'll come back to Healy Hutchinson in a minute. But despite the freely dramatised aspect, the script is increasingly hurried and a breathless attempt to condense the plot, as a grown-up Kay must enter in order to tell you what's happening. This compression of plot is nothing compared to the next version. In 1974, the novelist and scriptwriter Howard Jones tried his hand at a 55-minute adaptation. Jones decided to bring a character hitherto lost in previous versions to the fore. Arnold Toady becomes our narrator. This version was broadcast on the 21st of December 1974. It's an interesting experiment, but not a particularly successful one. It's very rushed, and the structure is, believe me, a little odd. But Healy Hutchinson is there right at the very beginning. Let's listen to the very start of this, the 1974 version, as Arnold Toady strives to tell us about the magical box and introduce the scene.
The Box of Delights. I'll warrant you've not heard of it. I'll warrant you've not heard of me, Arnold of Toady, a magician of high repute, who made this precious box. Alas, such is fame, a transient thing, a snare and a delusion, my young masters. But let me speak of the box, a small black box which may bring you visions of exquisite summer sweetness, or enable you at a touch to travel small and travel swift. Yes, truly a great magic is here.
Well done, Howard Shaw. Nobody liked your adaptation. 3 years later, the BBC decided to return to John Keir Cross's freely dramatised script, and by now there was only one actor who had been in all previous broadcasts. This was Norman Shelley. Now, as I mentioned before, he had a distinguished career as Winnie the Pooh, and there's also some debate as to whether or not his impression of Winston Churchill was the version that was recorded and broadcast. He often did an impression of Winston Churchill, and it's quite well known that potentially when people thought they were listening to Churchill, they were actually listening to our rat. Well, he was a very fine rat, I Can't But Not Play You, 1977. Norman Shelley, What Else But Green Cheese?
Ah, there's to be dark doings, Abner, that's what. And I don't like 'em, so I don't.
And is this my old friend Rat speaking, my trusted spy along the secret way?
Maybe I was, maybe I weren't. Maybe so it is me. But what's the good of being me? Up in the attic and down in the cellar all hours for one who'd sell his mother if he had one, for what she'd fetch his old bone.
Talk. That's all you ever do.
And what do I get by it, eh? Bacon fat, you might say, or the green of that cheese the dog won't eat, or the haggis that made the hen swoon. But I don't, my Christian friend. I get rheumatics, and the dog's sickered at me, that's what.
As a matter of fact, I've got some green-looking cheese for you now.
Ah, give here. Oh, no, you wouldn't. If you could sell it to a tourist's restaurant.
You're right, I wouldn't.
Then, having had radio broadcasts in the 1940s, 50s, 60s and 70s, it was time for BBC television. But before concluding, there's something which links all these radio adaptations, and I've touched on it beforehand. It's the title music, Healy Hutchinson's Carol Symphony. Victor Healy Hutchinson was a composer and a conductor. In 1926, he joined the BBC, and later, after a decade in academia, he returned as the director of music. Today, he's chiefly remembered for two pieces, the Carol Symphony, and also a setting of Edward Lear's The Owl and the Pussycat. For many, the third movement is, of course, the theme music to Box of Delights. The wonderful Robert Stevens, who was to play Abner, apparently only agreed to be in the TV series if they used, he said, on condition they agreed to use the music I associate with it from my childhood, a most glorious symphony of carols. The first performance of the symphony itself was given unseasonably early at a BBC prom on the 26th of September 1929 by the Henry Wood Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Healy Hutchinson himself. I can't play you that, of course. But Healy Hutchinson, together with the Royal Opera House Covent Garden Orchestra, recorded an abridged version of the piece, and this was issued on a very scratchy HMV 78 RPM in 1930. It's an exceptionally rare disc. I had to pay a vast quantity of money to the National Sound Archive at the British Library to obtain this, and I'll conclude a little snippet with the conductor, the composer, Healy Hutchinson, the Carol Symphony. So now our story has taken us up to 5 o'clock on the 21st of November 1984, but that is another story. Thank you.
you.